Thanks, Rob. Next, we're going to change up the format a little bit from individual presentations to our panel discussion with experts from across the industry. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the panelists. Mark Shuttleworth, the CEO of Canonical. Ken Sipe, the co-chair of the Operator Framework and the department leader of Application and Technology Architecture at Edward Jones. A bit of a mouthful there, Ken. Michael Hausenglass, solution engineering lead at AWS, a specialist in observability and a cloud native ambassador at the CNCF. Tim Hawken, a principal software engineer at Google Cloud, specializing in Kubernetes, GKE, and Anthos. Lachlan Evanson, principal program manager on the open source team at Azure. He's a cloud native ambassador and emeritus Kubernetes steering committee member and release lead. And Steve George, the chief operations officer at Weaveworks, which is a founding member of the CNCF, where they focus on unlocking cloud agility with GitOps. And myself, as you may remember from throughout the day, I'm David Booth, the VP of Cloud Native Applications at Canonical. And as we're running this roundtable remotely, panelists, I'll call on you to answer questions, but also feel free to ask questions of your own and respond to the comments of others. I'm very happy for this to turn into a discussion, and I'm keen to hear your real thoughts on these topics. Our audience is not looking for consensus, they're looking for information and healthy debate. All right, let's get this started. So over the last year, we've run 2 surveys with at least 1,000 respondents each. These surveys have turned into the Kubernetes and Cloud Native Operations reports that many people use as a guide to understanding the industry. Many of the panelists here provided feedback on the data that we collected in that survey, and the rest represent companies who provided feedback. I'd like to start by digging into some of the data. So in the last year alone, the percentage of respondents who answered, "We don't use hybrid or multi-cloud," dropped from 22.4% to 16.4%. If you look at it from the other point of view, more than 83% of respondents tell us that they're using either hybrid or multi-cloud. As each of you were opinionated about hybrid and multi-cloud usage patterns, I'd like to go around the table and hear your thoughts. Ken, do you want to kick it off?
Wow, I'm not sure where. That's a pretty open question. I can say that now that I work for an org where we're focused on kind of the implementation side of things, I used to be on the engineering side of Kubernetes or Mesos, kind of container orchestration, blah, blah, blah. We're definitely hybrid. We're definitely multi-cloud, and it's a bit of a challenge. It's a heavy lift, and sometimes we struggle with a number of things, but we're obviously in the fintech space. Security is high concern. Management organization is heavily concerned. We're definitely hitting multiple panes of glass in order to manage these things and trying to consolidate that. We sometimes use some opinionated platforms like from D2, which also has its own challenges. They introduce their own operators, and now we can't, we don't have control over that. So if we need to upgrade, say, Flux CD, we run into challenges. And then we have our own internal organizational challenges of needing to be skilled up in multi-clouds, highly distributed space. When we look at why do we do this? We need to be close to certain vendors. We look at latency numbers. And so now we're moving out from one region to another region to be close to a given vendor because they're critical. Of course, then region selection has a lot to do with, well, what's our disaster recovery responses in that space? What's the peered region? There's a lot of things that we could get into in that space, but it's definitely a heavy concern, and it seems and feels not fully mature. Everybody's doing things in isolation, and so we have challenges in that space. So we have the skilling challenges, as mentioned. We have alignment challenges. We have maturing challenges. We're trying to do the best we can with what we got.
We'll definitely get into challenges as we go through this set of questions today. Yeah. About multi-cloud and hybrid cloud usage and the growth in that. Mark, do you have some thoughts there?
My head is kind of spinning from what Ken said. I was just sort of fascinated by the idea that you would start picking regions based on latency to something specific, and it made me wonder whether we'll see a dynamic where some of the major public clouds would put regions very close to each other, either specifically to cloud. Maybe I'm missing something, and actually that's happening already. Or even whether you might see differential bandwidth pricing, where, for example, like region in one cloud to equivalent region in another cloud, traffic is priced differently, specifically to play to the desire that people have effectively for that kind of multi-cloud capability. That would be, I'm pretty sure, anathema to some people in the industry. But it just feels like what Ken was saying sort of implies that that's almost exactly what people are looking for. Just my own perspective, I think there's lots of reasons for people to want to work with multiple parties, and specifically for me, there's differential innovation, right? I see enormous amounts of innovation in the public cloud, but it's not all the same, and people are really staking out, positions on deep technology. You're just not going to get access to that unless you work with that cloud, and so I think there's good reasons why people will essentially think carefully and then pick, specific things that they want, access to, and build deep relationships. I suspect that there will be an upper bound on how many of those people can tolerate, for, again, the reason Ken was describing, that, there's an impedance, there's a cost to that bifurcation. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, to add to that, part of our challenge is we want to be close latently. We want to be close to certain vendors, but we also have too much work on the mainframe. So we actually have to get back to on-prem. And it's now you're balancing constraints and which one's more important. There's a lot that goes into this for sure, for a fintech space for sure.
Michael?
Yeah, I certainly see in the area of hybrid cloud, so on premises and moving to the cloud, a lot of needs and a lot of pain. And I think that open source and open standards may be one of the answers, or helping customers to ease that pain. Kubernetes being one great example. In my own space, OpenTelemetry, for example, and that is something that allows folks to, in this cloud native setup, write their applications, deploy their applications on premises, and then make it easier to move to cloud environments. That's at least my experience in the last couple of years.
Tim, Lachlan, and then Steve.
So the question is interesting, because I don't think hybrid and multi-cloud are the same thing at all, right? And they almost, maybe next year's survey, they should have two different questions. Hybrid is obvious for every company that's older than about 10 years old. They're coming from a hybrid place, and they're probably in the process of a very long transition. Multi-cloud is pretty much a necessity for anybody at real scale, because the clouds are not fungible, right? They're not the same thing. IaaS, yeah, okay, that's commoditized, but everything else, all the value-added services, they're special. And that's where the clouds are really competing with each other. And as a consumer, I think you'd be kind of foolish to not evaluate what the best of each cloud is, right? And if that ends up with you run some services at Amazon and some services at Google and some services at Microsoft, that's the way it's going to be for the indefinite future. And then you throw in multinationals and restricted regions like China or Russia. I mean, historically, that it gets more complicated, right? So I think that multi-cloud is inevitable.
We'll definitely look into, or I'll ask you about some of the different kind of advantages or specializations of each of the clouds later in the day, since three of you are here representing three of them. So that'd be great. Lachlan?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting question. I think what we're seeing is the signaling of the maturity of this ecosystem. So we're not in the adoption stage for many of the people that were adopting years ago. Now we're in that scale stage. And really what we're seeing is the fulfillment of that promise of, Kubernetes being the control plane of all the clouds, and starting to pivot off that and build differentiated services in different locations off that. So I think the other piece of information that we'd be remiss to look over in context of this question is growth of clusters, right? So we started out people adopting, they typically have a small number of Kubernetes clusters, maybe in different clouds, and they were operating them independently. Now, when I think of hybrid and multi-cloud, I agree with Tim that, they are two different concepts, and it's probably about time we treat them as different and ask different questions of them. But now people, customers and the community are looking at, how do I expand this? So I've got this estate of Kubernetes clusters, fleet of Kubernetes everywhere, right? I've got this common control plane everywhere. It's how do I tie them together? And how do I have one control plane to manage all the different locations that I'm operating, and building tooling and scaling capabilities to deal with that? Because as Ken said, we have customers with workloads on-prem in many different clouds, and they've kind of been operating, autonomously up until this point. But now they've grown to the point where it's time to get control of those fleets of Kubernetes everywhere and bring them back together and tie together a complex story, because we can't think about Kubernetes clusters as individual clusters anymore. It's how do I manage a fleet and start to have operations over that fleet, like availability, as Ken was saying, location, taking, getting closer to customers in different geographical regions. As Tim was saying, taking advantage of different differentiated services on different clouds and using Kubernetes as that common lingua franca of all clouds, whether on-prem or otherwise or public, but we can start to tie them together. So I think this is signaling we now have cloud native workloads running on Kubernetes. How do we scale and manage that estate over time? And this is the problem space many companies and customers are looking at right now. And I think that's really, we're going to see a lot of innovation. And I do see a lot of tools and services that now rationalize and start to bring control to, a fleet of Kubernetes clusters anywhere. And now we're going to have, the delivery of that promise, which was, hey, if you take a bet on Kubernetes, you'll be able to run it anywhere. And there is tools and platforms there, and we'll get differentiation in some different places, but that can be your bet. So I think it's a great kind of signal to see that that's coming, to fruition through the data that's uncovered in this survey. And I think you're going to see a lot of action in this space, multi-cloud and hybrid. And a lot of bets are placed on Kubernetes being that common control plane. And you'll see tooling, evolve on that ecosystem. Back to you. Thanks, David.
Steve?
So I think the others have really talked about the drivers for this. I'd say in terms of where things are right now, in terms of why or how you're going to approach it. One of the things I find most interesting at the moment is that on-premise, and the forms of kind of hybrid there are really useful in addressing one of the problems that customers see when they're trying to move to the cloud, which is sort of this lack of skills, and people really worried about that. So actually, there can be a strong argument for picking up a kind of hybrid approach or an on-premise approach early on for enterprises, because they can build up a skill set within an environment that they may already be or are already fully familiar with. So it's an interesting one, because then you're bringing Kubernetes into an environment that they already know. So I think that's quite an interesting one. And then the second thing I think is intriguing at the moment is this, Ken brought up this idea about opinionation versus standardization. Now, if you want to take advantage of the different capabilities that each cloud environment has, which is what Tim was addressing, then you don't want standardization. You want the ability to address the unique capabilities. On the other hand, from an operational perspective, when you're addressing all these different environments, you want standardization. You want the same installer experience, the same upgrade experience, the same versions of everything. So figuring out that kind of complete platform perspective, and then having that as a capability that you can deploy is really, really useful. And so I think that's one of the areas which is we're going to see more and more of, as Lachlan said, we're going to see a lot of development in this space over the next couple of years.
And as Lachlan said, we were looking at Kubernetes becoming maybe that common thread between our hybrid cloud platform. We're looking at where people are running applications in their organizations. And 14% of people said that they run everything on K8s. Over 20% said on bare metal and VMs, and over 29% said a combo of bare metal, VMs, and Kubernetes. Last year, Kelsey Hightower said that Kubernetes is a powerful tool, but bare metal is a better tool or a better choice for compute and resource heavy use cases such as interactive machine learning jobs. What's your take on this data, Lucky?
Yeah, I think again it comes around control. I think there's always going to be many different compute runtimes on clouds, and most companies are going to need a mixture of purpose-built compute runtimes, whether they're VMs, functions, containers, and really it's around how do I rationalize all those platforms behind one set of control. So even I see a lot of customers taking something like Kubernetes and inserting VMs through that control plane, saying, Kubernetes is still a great way to plug in different disparate, compute runtimes and rationalize them in a single way. So even though you may be running on VMs and VMs, may be better for some specific work cases as Kelsey workloads, as Kelsey mentioned, I think, it's all about control and what is my level of portability. So I do see a lot of customers looking at, frameworks that build on the Kubernetes platform. And I think Kelsey said as well as Kubernetes is a platform for building platforms. So again, I think, when I look at the tooling and, I was out building cloud platforms 10 years ago and working with, tools like Puppet and Chef, and they were all about having, a layer of control on top of VMs. And then when we introduce containers and functions, again, it's how do I rationalize those different compute runtimes through one control plane, or at least a platform that allows me to plug them in and build upon them. So I think we're going to see more flexibility. And the great thing about Kubernetes and the cloud native ecosystem is its ability to take in new runtimes and actually bring them into the fray and start to rationalize them. And I think Kubernetes is in a great position to take different compute runtimes and actually bring them into the fray. So I do see a lot of customers using tools like KubeVirt, for example, which represents virtual machines through the Kubernetes set of APIs, and you can rationalize them. So I see that as, hey, again, what's the bet we're making? Where, as Steve was saying, operationally, we want some base level standardization to build a platform for opinionated, our opinions on top of it. And Kubernetes is flexible enough to do that. And we are seeing, more and more customers turn to that. And I think a lot of the cloud providers' tools are, how do I represent those things in a Kubernetes native way? Because, when you bring all these things together, how do we bring skills and talent to pool around one common set of platform infrastructure? Makes it easier to scale the talent workforce, skills out there, and also, allows that system to get better itself.
Tim, have you got something to add to that?
Yeah, I agree largely with everything that Lockie just said. From the beginning of the Kubernetes process, we've talked about this continuum of compute from infrastructure as a service at one end, bare metal even beyond that, all the way to highly opinionated platform as a service, sort of app engine, Fargate sort of functions as a service, right? And Kubernetes falls somewhere in the middle, depending on how you use it. Maybe it's a little more towards infrastructure, it's a little more towards platform. But that was always the goal, was to try to hit a sweet spot in the middle. And one of the things that we've tried to keep through the Kubernetes lifecycle is this sort of fanatical devotion to portability, right? And making sure that we don't adopt APIs that aren't plausibly portable. And this has been a problem in some places, like I'll cite Ingress as an API, where we didn't want to take on a lot of opinion because we weren't sure that those APIs were going to be widely portable. And so we sat on it for a long time, and we ended up with a sort of under-purposed API, which couldn't really meet the needs of people who were trying to use it. So we're addressing that, but we try to be really cautious on intermediating on stuff, right? So KubeVirt's a great example where there's a lot of customers, I hear it too, customers who want to run VM workloads in their Kubernetes clusters. KubeVirt's great, right? Works really well for that. But KubeVirt is not the same thing as like a cloud native VM, right? GCE's VMs or Azure's VMs or AWS VMs, they offer things that KubeVirt doesn't. And we need to not try to abstract that and try to intermediate that with a standardized API. So, the topic of standard versus just differentiated, I think, is sort of a 90-10 problem. Customers are going to try to spend as much of their energy as they can on standardized solutions, but where that doesn't make sense, it has to be okay to break that glass.
Mark?
I think bare metal is super interesting, partly because I thought that there wasn't much that, an external actor could do in the Kubernetes space that could be better than what the infrastructure providers can do on their infrastructure, right? So simplistically, I never thought that there was a point in Canonical trying to win Kubernetes, because I didn't think anyone was going to win Kubernetes. I thought, on a particular infrastructure, the Kubernetes that is built into that infrastructure is the right Kubernetes. And if Canonical would have a role, it would be essentially to contribute to that effort, whatever people think we're good at, which turns out to be a little bit of the host and then a little bit of the containers that people want to run on top of that. But bare metal is the one place where there isn't an obvious infrastructure, right? I think Amazon wins on Amazon, Google wins on Google, Microsoft wins on Azure, AKS on Azure, Tanzu on VMware, I'm pretty sure, right? It's going to be really hard to deliver a Kubernetes there better than VMware's Kubernetes, just from a usability and integration kind of just work sort of point of view. But bare metal is this other place. It's this awkward, interesting, kind of difficult place, which has so much potential if you need to use like bare metal for bare metal things. So I just find it very, very interesting. Our take on that is charmed Kubernetes, right? The attempt is to sort of give people the ability to manage that beast in a model-driven way. I'm kind of fascinated by KubeVirt. At the moment, I don't think it's the right way to kind of do VMs for the average institution that wants to do VMs. I don't think you could rip out your VMware cluster and move to KubeVirt. Something about that just feels wrong to me, but maybe I'm just old. It feels to me, and Tim, I don't know if this is what you were referring to, but it feels to me like that's not VMs the way people want to do cloud VMs or the way people want to do kind of VMware VMs, right? It's a different thing that I don't maybe understand properly yet. And it's also not a firecracker, right? It's also not a gvisor. It feels just like something else that I haven't quite wrapped my head around. So my gut feel is that on-prem, you probably want a bare metal thing that does bare metal very well. I think you then want either Kubernetes on bare metal, where you're just doing pods on bare metal, or you want something that gives you VMs as a service and Kubernetes in kind of tenant at a tenant guest level there. That's kind of how I think about it right now. I may be missing a trick. I'd be very interested in what everybody else thinks on that particular set of questions.
It's actually, while we're on that, Steve, your co-founder Alexis mentioned that people using bare metal would probably be more interested in Kubernetes if they knew it could run on bare metal. Any thoughts to add while we're on that topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting about Kubernetes is how much of an abstraction layer it's going to be, and that's sort of what Lachlan's getting at. And you see it with customers in kind of two ways. So one way is what the others were referring to, which is, I want to run it in a variety of different environments, and then how do you go down into the infrastructure layer? And then this other one that you see is, how do I run it across different needs? So, I mean, we see a constant requirement for an integrated management plane for like databases, other systems. So you get this kind of horizontal desire for, managing everything via the API. I think on the bare metal side, it was not being very clear to people because of where Kubernetes came from as a cloud capability. It hasn't always been that clear to them they could run it just purely on bare metal. I think CAPI has changed that quite a bit over the last 18 months. It's become a lot clearer now that there are bare metal requirements. Tanzu is clearer, so forth and so forth. But it hasn't always been something. People have had a tendency to only refer to Kubernetes when it's something they want to do in the cloud.
Tim, yeah, I can see you kind of itching to say a little something else.
So to Mark's point, I would never, I don't say never, I would not often recommend to a cloud customer that they should run KubeVirt in their cloud. because I don't think it's going to satisfy what they need. I don't think they're going to get the level of efficiency or integration that they want, right? If you have a VM-ish workload that needs the characteristics of a VM and you want to run it on Google, I'm probably going to tell you to run it in a VM. The place where I think KubeVirt fits and is an interesting spot is for that subset of customers who need to run some VM-like workloads. They need some of the properties of VMs, but they don't need all of the bells and whistles of something like VMware. And there's a surprising number of people in that category. I was very skeptical, but the more I talk to customers, the more I hear this. They have workloads that they want to modernize, but they need a complete story, and they need to cross that cell of their matrix off. And so KubeVirt scratches that itch for them, and they don't need to buy their VMware or continue their VMware product or be a new customer if that was it. And then they can get on the migration story towards Kubernetes. I find that there's a bit of a gap between where KubeVirt in Kubernetes today stops and what people expect out of VMs. And so, one of the things I'm trying to figure out in my Kubernetes role is, can we close that gap? Maybe not close it, but can we narrow the gap?
Anyone want to add to that?
I think the migration use case is very true. There's plenty of people who are going through very long migration processes and they want to have a Kubernetes-centric view of that. We've done a bunch of work around Firecracker and Flintlock and lightweight VM work, which has mostly been driven by telcos who have got workloads which are going to take a long time to be migrated to be fully cloud native. And so I think that it's a general question that Kubernetes faces over the next few years is how general a platform is it? Or will people have to do, as Tim said, punch through to different APIs? And I think we just don't know the answer yet. Everybody's still playing with these different kinds of capabilities.
Very fair. We within the first couple minutes of this conversation, we already started jumping into some of the challenges when it comes to Kubernetes, which is not shocking. But when we asked our respondents to the survey that same question, we generally see similar answers cropping up each year. So lack of in-house skills, company IT culture, incompatibility with legacy systems, difficulty training users. Yet the Kubernetes growth continues. Many folks here could be considered vendors. So maybe we'll go to Ken first and say, do you want to talk about the environmental factors at play here?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And maybe it's a continuation of the previous conversation a bit, but just as Tim was mentioning, there's this difference between hybrid and multi. Bare metal, it's just a resource kind, right? I can think of 3 reasons that someone might choose that. We know that VMs have a heavy hit against I/O. So if you have a I/O intensive environment, like a certain fruit company might have, you might go bare metal. The other aspect of that is we have a higher workload density, or maybe bin packing, whatever you want to call that. So if you look at the ancestry of this, right, we could go back to the Borg or to Omega. When you look at the highest level of maturity, you're looking at how can I get the maximum value, business value out of the resource compute that I have. And most people aren't even close to that. They're just when we talk about the complexities, they're just learning. I think the one big reason why we see some good adoption is while we have new versions coming out on some cadence, usually for a year, it's now been reduced. That's great. We have high stability in the core. So pods, deployments, they're relatively highly stable. Outside of that, we would be in serious trouble. When we talk about gearing up skills, people want, I see a couple of different things, but mostly they are in the learning process and they're going off of what they read, what they see. They're not, thought leaders in how do I maximize my bin packing. They're not even close to that yet. They're just in a maturity model, getting to, level 1 or 2. They're playing, if you will, in the cloud. Or on Kubernetes in general, and it's met with all kinds of complexity. There's a lot of, do I need to know Go? Yes or no? Do I? Well, let's add a real complexity in there in the space that everyone here should be somewhat familiar with. Operators. There is no definitive way of having an API control to operators. It's very, all over the map. So there's no unification of how do I interact with an operator. There is a unification of how an operator acts within the cluster, but how do I manage it? How do I version the API of the thing that I want to integrate with? That is so chaotic. And it has, based on that, has no stability that we can count on. And there's no leadership kind of in that space to drive that. And it's super concerning. I'll pause.
I'll definitely get into operators a little bit later, but while we're talking about like kind of the other challenges that mainly seem around in-house skills or IT culture, maybe legacy systems, Tim, you had a comment about greenfield versus brownfield and Kubernetes origins. Do you want to dive into that a bit?
Yeah, I don't remember my exact comment, but let's see if I can invent it from whole cloth. Kubernetes is very attractive for the sort of greenfield customers, right? The customers who don't have any baggage, who come in and say, what should I build from scratch? And if you can take that position, it's great. But the truth is Kubernetes has to integrate with existing estates. And it's got to build bridges into things that already exist, right? The proverbial brown fields. And honestly, maybe this is a place where we as a Kubernetes community didn't do as great of a job as we could have done, right? I personally feel my own limitations, the results of decisions that I made early on in the process that make it difficult to integrate with existing systems sometimes. And as we cross the chasm and we start talking to more mature companies, these fintechs and the large retailers and those sorts of things, they have a lot of baggage and they've made a lot of historical decisions that they don't feel like re-adjudicating. And Kubernetes doesn't always give them the right hooks or the right flexibility or the right opportunities to integrate the way that they would like to integrate. I think that's maybe the next big frontier for the next 10x adoption is figuring out how to integrate better.
Michael?
Going back to the skills observation, I think that Kubernetes is really like this very, very powerful system, beautiful API. Can probably agree with me. We both have shared Mesos background, and that's great. But it also requires that you either build these skills internally or have a strategy around how you actually get them, in-house if and when you need them. And that has a number of implications. On the one hand, for people investing in that space, and there are a number of programs there, CKA, CKAD, CKS, and so on by CNCF that allow people to gain these practical skills in a very effective manner. And that's great. And it's a matter of portability as well and flexibility, being able to, rather than learning a proprietary API, you can learn something that is, usable across different jobs. And theoretically, that also should mean that it's easier to hire people, right? And have a larger pool of folks. I think we're still a little bit out there. We still, it probably takes another number of years to get to a place where we have a big enough pool where it's like, oh yeah, I need like 10 Kubernetes engineers and on these levels, and I can just hire them and next week they start. So until we get there, that would be one of my tips in that area. Have a good, if you're adopting Kubernetes, have a good idea about how you go, either pulling that required knowledge in from a service provider or ramp that up internally in time that you have it when you need it.
That's fair. Lachlan?
I think we're at a point now where we need to create easy buttons, right? In order for this to scale, we need to get it to everybody else, right? Who's not necessarily concerned with all the inner workings of Kubernetes. Right. So Kubernetes for the masses and everybody else, we need to scale it. We need to provide integrated experiences, as Tim said, and I think easy buttons. Just like not everybody is a Linux kernel developer, but when Linux was coming up, most people in the space had to be a Linux kernel developer. we take these abstractions and we start to go up the stack and we build upon them. And the rate of change really skyrockets when not everybody needs to know about the inner workings, and they just take it as, I have an easy button, I can trust that these things will work, and I can go about my business. So I think, when we talk to customers, you have people and customers that are looking to build in-house teams with all these very intricate skills and contributing upstream to Kubernetes. But then on the other side of the spectrum, there's people who are like, Kubernetes isn't my core business. I want to take a dependency on Kubernetes, but I want to build these things, right? And I have no interest in staffing a highly skilled team of engineers that understand all the intricacies of Kubernetes. They don't have a Linux kernel team either, right? And they don't have a silicon hardware team either. We need to really create easy buttons and experiences. And that's what we have done at Azure, is really try to take out the sharp edges and make it so that people can make a decision. Do I want to consume the managed, and what do I get from the managed? Or do I want to staff a team that can consume from the fire hose upstream? Both answers are valid. But I really think in order to scale and get those numbers up, it's going to be, the ecosystem of vendors really creating easy experiences. So, as Steve said, not many people know you can run Kubernetes on bare metal. They want an easy button too. They want Kubernetes here, and I know I can get it upgraded and operated. So I really think what we need to do is make it easier. And it's not because people can't learn it. That takes time. And I think, it's not necessarily the goal to make, everybody an expert engineer on Kubernetes. I think that would not be, really worthwhile. So I really think where we're going to focus our energy is making it much simpler to build the things you actually want to build, give you the tools that you actually need to get your business. Because, now we're going from those early adopters who are going to staff those people and build those skills to, larger and broader adoption. It's going to be our ability to make that easy. So, I think that's the challenge, is how do we make it easy so that you don't need the 5 or 7 years that, Tim and I have been working in at experience and cognitive and context in order to operate or be successful on Kubernetes.
It's an excellent point. And I think the early adoptions of Kubernetes so far have probably been startups, open source, the greenfield stuff we talked about. But if we're wanting to adopt enterprise level customers, I see several things. One is the last numbers I remember, but it's years ago, was 80% of enterprises are Java. Okay, so now we have to be Java friendly. We could break this down into ops, or we could break it down into dev. But on the ops side, the idea that an enterprise would use whatever OS image that you have out there on the cloud is highly unlikely. They're going to want to vet it. They're going to want to put in their checks and controls in place. So they're going to change the operating system. And so the easy button, if we're looking for it, has to include an enterprise workflow that includes their ability to put checks and processes in place. You have to integrate with Kerberos. There's a number of things we could go into if you're going to integrate into the enterprise and get that level of adoption.
The clouds are in such a great position to kind of show the way on this, because of their ability to make possibilities that are instantly available to a huge number of different people who are already pre-trained on most of what they need to know. So I love this idea that effectively the trailblazing here it happens in the public cloud. I can't see the tangled world of private infrastructure being a place where kind of making it easy can happen. I think this can only happen in a public cloud environment. So I'm really glad that trailblazing is happening. I've just been sort of noodling on a couple of things that got said. Lachlan, earlier you talked about big clusters shift. I think you said basically single big clusters shifting to many smaller clusters. And I wasn't sure whether it was just because people are building more clusters or because people are starting to sort of manage blast radius and granularity for other reasons. And I was listening to Tim talking about integration with the rest of the world, Kubernetes kind of having to live alongside and in betwixt, reality and complexity. And I'm curious what everybody else is seeing. I've always been uncomfortable by this one Kubernetes cluster to rule them all approach that I do see in a lot of places. Like a lot of people are doing it, and maybe they're right, but it kind of makes me feel like itchy and uncomfortable in weird ways. I feel like, okay, if it goes wrong, everything goes wrong. That smells like OpenStack, right? So, okay, that was fun. If I have to upgrade something, that means I'm upgrading everybody all on, flag day is a flag day for every application on that cluster. So it's always felt to me like we need to make it easy for people to have lots of different clusters. And I was curious, Lachlan, as to whether you were sort of seeing that behavior. And then the last thing is, institutionally, I think there's lots of reasons to segment stuff, right? Some of those are bad, my stuff, your stuff. And some of them are useful, as in, well, we've got different policies that apply in different places, or we've got different teams that have to work in different places. We've got different people paying for stuff. So there's reasons to have segmentation, which again sort of leads you to have Kubernetes having to fit into many different places and serve different purposes in many different places. So operability, really becomes critical in that environment, because you can't just have the one Kubernetes team that manages the Kubernetes and everybody else is just a consumer. You essentially have to have it on demand wherever you need it, with low cognitive overhead. The easy button that you were referring to. I don't know. Does that resonate? Does that?
Yeah, and it's also triggering in some ways. I remember the early days of Kubernetes. Mesos was out there, and it was that race to the largest cluster, right? Because Mesos had, a different type of framework. 10,000 nodes wasn't unheard of, and Kubernetes was in that 500,000, 5,000, 10,000. I see most customers coalescing to small purpose-built, and I think we're going to see more purpose-built clusters per workload, and stamping them out, and then control across, horizontally across those clusters. So rather than the one cluster to rule them all and have it multiple, failure domains and all this. So I think, multi-clusters quickly becoming smaller purpose-built clusters. And I'd love to see a rise of purpose-built for specific workloads. Let's have an ML cluster. Let's have a functions cluster. Let's have or a triggered kind of event workflow cluster. I would love to see really clusters that are purpose-built for a specific set of users and come pre-baked with a set of tools, so that you get a set of endpoints up and running. And if I'm a data scientist trying to train some ML models, because that's what I do for my job, I just get the easy button for that type of Kubernetes experience. And if I'm a front-end workload designer doing web work, I get another kind of experience. So I'd like to see, less generic, here's just a bunch of, here's the empty toolbox, go build what you like. But hey, here's the prefabbed, flat-packed, experience that, tools, batteries included here, that you can get up and running, so that you don't have to do a lot of heavy lifting, because throwing you a bunch of IaaS APIs is still a heavy lift to get up to where you need to be productive for most people. So, I really would like to see some more opinion in those places in the ecosystem, and whether we can have, bespoke, workload experiences, I think would be interesting.
We've talked about lack of skills, easy button challenges, and some forms of tooling that can help to make the work easier. When we asked our audience, what is your preferred method for operating, updating, maintaining software on Kubernetes, the answers ranged from scripts to config management tools to GitOps operators. Helm was the most popular, but only slightly more popular than scripts, with about 25% of respondents saying that they use it. Tim, I guess you've got a bit of an opinionated view on Helm about opinions and complexity. Do you want to dig into that a bit?
Yeah, for sure. There's a couple of different problems here, and we tend to conflate them because they have the same verbs, but they have different subjects and objects, right? So like upgrading an application is a very different thing than upgrading a cluster. And they're done by different people, or at least the same people with different hats sometimes. And, we're talking about this one cluster to rule them all, right? I always steer customers away from that. There's very rare use cases where you need a 10,000 node cluster, right? And we'll go out of our way to support it if you can convince us that that's the right thing for you to do. But like, at least on GKE, you can't do that without calling us, right? We've got to have a conversation about what you're trying to do with it and why, because almost always you're better served by a bunch of 500 node clusters or 1,000 node clusters than you are by a 10,000 node cluster. And we've identified like 25 reasons that people use multiple clusters, from blast radius, which I think Mark mentioned, security, noisy neighbors, administrative roles, jurisdictional concerns, upgrade pacing, hardware capabilities, billing, tenancy. Like all these reasons are valid reasons for having multiple clusters. And the problem here becomes then, how do you wrangle all of those clusters, right? Is there a single pane of glass? Can you coordinate actions like an application upgrade across those set of clusters? Can you coordinate provider initiated cluster upgrades, right? If you're running an Azure, can the Azure control plane manage your cluster updates across those clusters in a way that you find meaningful, right? Like always do cluster X before cluster Y. Those sorts of things I think are the next frontier of control. Multi-cluster, like cluster per application, I'm not a big fan of. I think it's practical. I think it's the right now answer, but not the right answer. I think Kubernetes sort of falls down on the level of isolation that we really want to balance that. We've got to find the fulcrum there. Right now, I think we've over pivoted from single clusters to hundreds of tiny little clusters, and there's got to be a middle ground there.
That's a good kind of continuation of the slightly previous conversation. But if we're looking at things like Helm in particular, Tim, do you wanna hit that button again?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I missed that part of it. Yeah, I mean, we need tooling, right? We needed packages, and the various Linux distributions gave us packages in various forms, and packages are really the only way that people can interact with stuff today, right? Like it's just ludicrous, the idea that you would download source code from some random site and compile it yourself and then run it yourself. And like there's some hardcores who do it, but they're pretty out in the fringe. So we need the equivalent of this for Kubernetes. I don't know if Helm exactly literally is the right model here. I have my own problems with sort of pseudo YAML templating, but like all the answers kind of smell bad. I don't think we found the right answer in that way yet. But again, Helm is a very cluster-centric concept. How do I then up-level that to groups of clusters or groups of clusters? And I don't know how arbitrary that gets. But that I think is the next set of questions.
Lockie, on your LinkedIn profile, it identifies you as a Helm charts maintainer. So
yeah, no, I would say, it's a continuum and a spectrum of the right tool for the right job at the right time. It's really easy to overstep where you're at. And, being part of the Helm community and building Helm, it was really around that nascent problem in early Kubernetes of, if I needed to deploy Jenkins on Kubernetes, I would have to go copy and paste a whole bunch of stuff together and kind of mangle it together. And there was no kind of, system of record out there that would show me the best way to do that. So we were hoping with Helm just to package those things up to make your first Kubernetes experience great, right? So I can get a Jenkins running. Now I can work back to look at how those resources were created. And then you kind of level up to these tools like Customize, and there are many other tools in the ecosystem where you get to this GitOps level. So I think it's just a maturity. So I think, some people find Helm useful for everything, but I think most people end up leveling out of Helm because they end up on this GitOps journey where, okay, now I want to start to check things into, source control. I want to manage them over time. Helm's not great at that because it's more imperative per use, whatever variables you input. Then you level up. But by the same token, if I tell a brand new customer to go figure out Customize, like they're going to go, oh my goodness, right? Where do I start? So it's just, it's the continuum and it's the journey. So you have to go through these checkpoints as you mature on your cloud native journey. And I think what some people do is they're far along in their journey and they go, Helm's not that helpful. But you go, remember back when you were learning Kubernetes. So it's very easy to kind of look down your nose as being a seasoned professional and go, Helm isn't that useful, but it's useful for some piece of your journey. And it's not for everybody's journey in some time, but we always look to this one tool to do everything perfectly. And what we end up doing is, creating this generic hodgepodge of things that don't do anything well. So when you look at the ecosystem exists because there is tools for everything. Just like, when you're building something, there are many different types of screwdrivers, spanners, shifters. Pick the right tool for the right, what you need to do at the right time, and be flexible in changing that tool. So I think Helm adds a valuable piece for some people's journey, not others. But this tooling exists for a reason. And I see, many people level up to operators too, right? So you come from that kind of tooling to a way that you can interact with that via an API in Kubernetes. So I would say, it's a continuum. So don't be so hard on yourself making these decisions that they're final. You pick Helm and you can't change. I see most people, come in, they use it for a time and change gears based on the needs and their maturity over time.
Well, let's follow that journey then. Steve, do you want to dive into GitOps a bit?
Sure, yeah. The first thing is I've just discovered from Tim that I'm on the fringe because I compile my own software still. But I think this is really, there is something that we're sort of talking about here, which is developers at one end of the spectrum who just really want to get their applications deployed, start using them on Kubernetes, start using them in the cloud. And so for that kind of personality, these kind of what Lachlan was referring to, like easing that transition and easing that process as much as possible, I think is really, really important. I've seen lots of migrations where, or lots of attempts to get into Kubernetes where you go back and, 6 months, 9 months, people are still building their platform. They haven't got their applications or any application deployed. And I think GitOps is sort of an attempt to flip that on its head. So for me, aside from all of the things that we talk about with Git, we sort of talk about the fact that it's the way that developers work. It's a natural way of working. It's a natural transition process. It's tooling they're already familiar and comfortable with. So really just being able to take your application, get it into your Kubernetes environment, wherever that is, and then start learning, okay, because actually this week we are using more clusters, so I am going to have to learn customize, or I want to package it in a variety of environments, so Helm is the right thing to do. Or, there's lots of things that you can do. And as Lachlan said, no one's really stuck with their tools. You can move as the need fits. But I think the starting position for GitOps is, get your applications, get them into Git, and then deploy them into your Kubernetes environment, and then start getting the benefit of Kubernetes rather than going the other way around and spending, 9 months building the perfect platform, which, given the speed that we move in the Kubernetes community, you may well discover that the perfect platform is not quite perfect within that 9 months. So I would say, GitOps and application centric is the way to go.
So you're talking about Helm, GitOps. Ken, you're on the steering committee here. Do you want to talk about operators?
Yeah, so I have a thought to share, if I might, on the existing topic. And yeah, cool. I think Helm is going to have a pickup in adoption, and I think it's largely driven by the fact that they added it to the latest Kubernetes certified Kubernetes application developer test. So in September they added that in. That's going to be a natural transition of I have to know this in order to be a certified application developer. I totally agree with everything that was just said, that it is on the journey and you may choose in or out of that. I think we've made things hard on ourselves as an industry. So like Azure, I'm going to call it out. It's a negative. I'm apologizing. But on the Azure side, they're really pushing for, if you look at the documentation for help on the ACR, it's like, oh yeah, you need to use this experimental flag. How did we get to the point that we are leveraging experimental things as our official documentation on how we manage an enterprise solution? I don't feel like that serves us. I think it's great to have early adoption documentation. I'm not against that. But if you are saying this is what we expect and how to use, OCI, because we really want to push for that, the industry just wasn't ready. It needs to be, solidified, matured to a certain point that an enterprise or a more mature organization can adopt it and understand it. And I think that's one small example of things in this space, by the way. So it's not just one example. There's many. So questions in the operator space, where'd you want to go?
Well, we were talking about it as something of a journey here, where we're looking at kind of Helm, and then people can maybe move into GitOps, and then operators seems to be fewer people are currently using them, but we always see like in response to this survey that 30% of people say that they're really interested in learning about them.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It scares me. It scares me because it's the shiny thing that people gravitates. You're really sharp minds. I want to do this like cutting edge thing. And there's probably, just as Helm is a good example of, there's a space for it, but it's not all the things. Operators fall in that same category. There's definitely a great ability to hook yourself into the control plane, but you got to be very mindful about when to do that. And I also find that understanding a highly distributed environment is actually really challenging, and probably more so than we give it credit. So, and now you're in a space of not just a highly distributed world, but eventual consistency, which commonly throws things off from an operator standpoint. It just takes a bit to kind of understand that space. With that said, as we started to more support Java as a framework to be able to develop operators on, that space is maturing a little bit in the last 6 months. I do think we'll start to see more people at least dabble into that space. And at a minimum, it gives them a deeper experience into the control plane. Aside from the fact of whether it's the right thing to do, it definitely helps to understand what that control plane is doing and how it works. So,
is there something to be said for who's creating that operator? There's been commentary around if someone who's maybe a MySQL expert and they've spent 5 years working in the deep dark, and then they go and create an operator for MySQL, is that's something that people would generally trust? I think 80% of respondents said that, hey, yeah, they would trust an operator from somebody who's an expert who's built that.
Yeah.
Does that resonate?
Well, where my mind went was there is a decision point that we tend to get to, and that is, do I want to run this out of band or do I want to run it in band? So like having a cloud provider provide a MySQL and managed itself is one of those considerations. I could offload the responsibility, the upgradability, all the abilities, right? And there's something very attractive to that. And there's also a lack of maturity within the control plane. So it's a matter of how many panes of glass do you want to have in order to manage a thing? And it ties into other complexities. But yeah.
Is there a way that they become used to reduce complexities? I don't know, maybe Mark, do you wanna pick this one up?
Oh man, for me, this is genuinely the most interesting problem on the planet, right? It really, really is. And lots of people make the analogy with distributions and Linux distributions. And I think it's a valid echoing, you know what I mean? Like it's a valid rhyme. It's not the same, but it's a valid kind of rhyme. So someone who pulled a bit of a rabbit out of the hat on distributions, I wish could just say, oh, here's the rabbit right here. But I don't think it is that way, right? We are grasping in the dark and trying to figure stuff out, and it isn't the answer isn't obvious, right? I like Lachlan's analogy about how we make things that solve a problem, and then the net effect is that the whole isn't necessarily very well designed, right? It's almost like there are sort of local maxima, and we kind of work ourselves into a local maximum. But to be in a much better place, you kind of have to go be like Grigori Perelman in mathematics, or you have to go off like somewhere crazy where no one else wants to spend time, and then you end up in a much better place, but everyone thinks you're crazy for a while, right? So for me, this simple problem of how do people get their software without worries, that is sort of the very deep question, and very, very hard. I think in a sense, Kubernetes almost is an obfuscator of the reality, because I mean, in a very simple sense, I would say, like something that just works on Kubernetes isn't going to help people as much as something that works on Kubernetes and everywhere else as well, right? Like people aren't trying to solve their Kubernetes software management problem; they're trying to solve their software management problem, right? And so there are just all these ways in which we trap ourselves into thinking that the answer must be somewhere over here, when in reality, maybe it isn't. But I think that's normal. I think I think back to the early 90s of Linux distributions coming in all sorts of shapes and sizes with different ideas, it was crazy. Now they all kind of look the same. But that's because effectively we went through that crazy part, right? And then some big ideas emerged as things that everybody else could kind of follow. So right now, I think we're in the sort of 90s of Linux distributions, right? You've got your Slackwares and your Linux from scratches and your, I can't even remember the names, your Knoppix, your Debians, your Fedoras, I mean, like it's a little bit the Wild West. It's very, very fun. It's very, very interesting. But we haven't yet found that sort of unifying set of things that everybody's willing to let go of, right? I think when you look at a Kubernetes cluster today, it's like looking at sysd init scripts. Do you know what I mean? Like there's just so much going on and so much that you can poke at and change, and nobody does that stuff anymore. Do you know what I mean? We've let go of a lot of, program your own kernel and rewire your init scripts. We've let go of all of that. What we're going to let go of in the Kubernetes era in order to be in a much better place, that's just not clear yet. It's very interesting, but it's just not clear yet.
I realize that we may be going over a little bit for some folks here. So to the audience, you may see a couple people dropping off the panel. That's totally fine. Some others have said that they're able to stick around. So I've got a few more questions. And then, Mark, are you one of the ones who's going to have to drop?
Big off, and just say it was so great to see you guys again. And I can't believe I didn't get to ask you about serverless, because I really want to know about that, and I don't know anything about that. Get you guys wait. But there we go. Next time, another time. Okay. Anyway, enjoy the rest of the day. For those of you who've got a job, thank you very much for attending. We appreciate your time. For the rest of you, maybe we've got 2 or 3 more questions, and then we'll wrap it up there. So I can see that that Lucky, you were able to stick around. We were talking about security with Jose Miguel Pereira, and he said for Kubernetes and containers, the biggest questions are around scaling, eviction, and upgrade policies. He's like, basically, how are you going to keep Kubernetes updated? They're often it's often a day 30 discussion for people who are running K8s in production. People are starting to realize that there's no deploy it and let's just see how that goes. He's saying that there's several reliable releases a year that include API changes, and people need to know to stay on top of that. For teams who are testing cloud native tech today, including Kubernetes, when's the right time to start thinking about those day 2 or day 30 issues like security and updates?
Yeah, I've always said, change is the only constant. So, I think you don't want to detach from what upstream Kubernetes is doing. So create a way and a system to be able to stay on top of getting the releases up to date. And, you really, in a meta sense, harnessing the power of the open source community there for your security needs, making sure things are patched and updated and as needed. So what we've done in the last few years in Kubernetes is really get towards ABI stability and across all the workload APIs, so that this, the rate of change across the surface area of the APIs is much smaller, right? So, that also means that people's willingness to change is lower because there's nothing they actually need in the newer releases. But, I think getting yourself in a position, so all these things come back to multi-cloud. How do we use multi-cloud to deliver an experience where I can consume and update and test new Kubernetes releases and make sure that I'm in a position to feel comfortable about, moving through that sliding window, as I like to think of it, as making sure I'm in that sweet spot of staying up to date with Kubernetes. And I think it's not necessarily the thing you think about when you start with Kubernetes, but it's something that comes around and you inadvertently have to deal with eventually. So all the tools you use and employ to be able to build your platform really, set you up in a position to be able to make the Kubernetes cluster that you're dealing with a little more fungible. And I've seen, many platforms be able to deal with updates and upgrades. But what I think, from a managed service perspective, it's really bubbling up the right knobs and dials to deal with the change and taking into account all the reliability APIs and features that are part of Kubernetes and exposing them as knobs and dials. I think Tim alluded to the, hey, only want to update this cluster first, these percentage of workloads, I'm you know, as long as I don't take a hit on this SLA, I can deal with this upgrade. So, you know, I think what you're going to see is as the multi-cloud tooling becomes more and more, you know, established in the ecosystem, we're going to see tools that say, bubble up, you know, really something that you can control and define a policy over how upgrades go. And it may even just become a thing that you can define some high level abstraction over what your workload availabilities are. And the system actually makes sure that you're updated on your own. And, you know, I think this common thread of we've done this and we've gone through this with, you know, Linux kernels and other pieces. So it's built tooling and platforming where we can reliably do the updates and create an easy button. But I think, you know, hopefully these managed service providers and other solutions really deal with upgradability and bake it into their platform, because it is complex under the hood. It's like, you know, trying to change the tires on a vehicle that's going 60 miles an hour down a freeway. It's not easy to do. And the easier we make it to express, you know, what your availability and what your risk tolerance concerns are in some way that's configurable, I think the better. Because the fact of the matter is we make customers think about it too much right now. We need to make them think about it less and make it more secure for them. So easier to consume these updates.
Steve, do you want to take a developer perspective on this?
Yeah, I mean, flipping it from a developer perspective, I think developers just really want to be able to deploy their applications onto new versions of Kubernetes, or, you know, whether that's in a single cloud or multiple clouds, and you know, that should be as seamless as possible and straightforward as possible. With GitOps, we've been doing a lot of work around what we're calling trusted delivery, which fundamentally is using, you know, GitOps for application deployment and then associating policy and automation with that. And the policy is really doing the things where it's testing whether their APIs are correct, testing whether the environment is correct. It doesn't really matter that it's policy. It could be any form of automation, just that's what we've selected. And I think the guarantee that what we're trying to do is to give the application a sense of the environment that it needs and the environment that it's running in, and then it can be deployed successfully or report back successfully that this environment doesn't hit the requirements. And I think from a developer perspective, you know, that should look like a very you know, simple GitOps workflow. So really from a developer perspective, what they want is, you know, git deploy new environment, and then something comes back and says, yep, we're all good, or okay, there's some things missing here, you know, we can't rely on that. So I think there's some interesting workflow things there, you know, that we really need to work on, but from a developer and a platform perspective.
Tim, do you want to add something there?
Yeah, you know, from a Kubernetes community point of view, we've spent a bunch of time over the last year or two trying to make these sort of customer impacting API deprecations less common and less painful. We've instituted a bunch of policies and procedures throughout the project to make those not a thing that people should come to depend on. Right? People shouldn't be going to prod on beta APIs, for example. So we're trying to make that better. You know, we've also slowed down the release cadence from 4 a year to 3 a year, which was met with a lot of consternation, right? Because on the one hand, that's great for enterprise customers who don't want to have to do all this manual work. It's also terrible because the less you exercise that muscle, the less ready it is to deal with these sorts of changes. You know, if it was possible, I'd love to do a release every week so that people would stop trying to do it all manually and would make sure that everything is automated and automatic. Because at the end of the day, I think right now we have a Boolean signal, which is humans who look at something, we can't tell what it is, it's completely opaque to us, and they decide whether it's okay to do an upgrade or not, right? Whether we position that as an acceptance test or something else, but it's black box to us. I would much rather see us move to a place where upgrades are governed by policies and signals, and we can start to normalize on what those signals are. You know, passing conformance is one signal, but it's not a very useful signal for a customer, right? It's, does my application work here? Is my performance within standard deviation? Am I serving errors? And we've got to figure out how to describe those things in a better way so that people stop being afraid of the upgrades. They shouldn't be a big event. They should be, oh, look, I got an upgrade last night. That's cool.
I'm conscious that Michael's got limited time here, and I realize that the rest of the panel probably is going to have to go pretty soon. So, Michael, observability challenges, solutions, best practices you've seen emerging over the last year or so?
Yeah, so I think the bottom line really is that observability has gone mainstream, right? Where in the last 10, 15, 20 years, might have been relevant for specific roles. You might be a performance engineer and you would do some profiling, or you would be, an operator and you would be looking at dashboards and get paged and whatnot. Nowadays, it's much more, shift left and much more, relevant for everyone. If you look at distributed tracing, trying to figure out where along a request path a microservice might be slow that's running in Kubernetes. And Kubernetes itself is really a great source. If you look at, logs are there, metrics, very, very strong. We now even get traces out of the API server. We see the more or less, democratization around telemetry through open telemetry, meaning that the telemetry, how to get the signals from the sources to the backends is kind of like table stakes, and we can focus on more interesting things or more valuable things. There are certain challenges around that, obviously, because a bit like security, it's absolutely crucial, but it's not something that really in itself is an added value for people. You have to do it, you have to invest in it, otherwise you're flying blind. But it's from a business perspective hard to argue if you don't have a clear return on investment, be that instrumenting your code or storing signals for a long time or whatever. And Kubernetes is really great. It's a great platform in this observability space, but there are still a lot of challenges for all of us, be it on the platform side, be it on using that platform to make it really getting a real value out of it in all shortness.
This is one of those conversations where you get like this caliber of people in the room, and sorry to give compliments around the room. I know I'm not supposed to do that as a moderator, but when you get this group of people in the room, there's so many different paths, there's so many different channels, there's so many different conversations that we could have here. For people at KubeCon this week, many of us are around. Say hi, stop, have conversations with us. I'm going to call it there, say that's it for today, folks. I'd like to thank each of the panelists for joining us and remind everyone to pick up the Kubernetes and Cloud Native Operations Report for 2022 and wish you all a very wonderful KubeCon. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Year round.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you.